In fact, I think the summary of every story is it's more than the sum of its parts, right? The process that they went through is for them so much more valuable than if I would have just said, you know what, I already knew what you were coming here for today, and here's your book. I wrote it for you.
What if story is the answer to our crises of meaning and belonging, to our impulse to heal our lives and help others, to our desire and drive to leave this world better than we found it? Now, we love good stories. In fact, we're kind of obsessed, not just with the stories themselves, but with the stories behind the stories. Their oddly perfect timing, the healing process they provoke in their authors, and their capacity to catalyze individual and collective change. And we love exploring these with writers, thought leaders, entrepreneurs, healers, parents, and others. Tune in to hear these stories behind the stories and entertain with us the real possibility that whether you are a teller or a consumer, story is always offering or leading us to an answer. When clinical therapist Lonny Webb heard one of my clients talk about her experience at her first retreat and throughout the writing of her book, he suspected that maybe I was more than a writing coach. After 20 years of demonstrating his place at the crosshairs of effectiveness and compassion, he recognized some of the strategies being used and got curious. So we had a few conversations, and I realized that I needed to get him onto this podcast so that y'all could hear the science that really grounds the work that messengers do when they sit down to write their story. Tune in today to hear us talking about how the choice to become a messenger often destabilizes relationships, why that happens, and what you can do about it. You'll find out why writing your story, or what the researchers call narrative therapy, helps to heal trauma, and what elements are needed to make it easier. And maybe most importantly, you're going to find out the critical importance of dark chocolate on the journey. I know it makes you laugh, but it really does keep the dementors away. It's that time. Grab a cup of something yummy and a really nice piece of dark chocolate for this one today, and come sip on some story and sanity with us. All right, welcome to Sips of Story and Sanity, where we talk about the stories behind the stories with authors, speakers, thought leaders, healers, parents, and more. My team, son Aaron, who couldn't be here today, sister Alyssa also can't be here, and clients turned friends turned team members, Teddy.
Hi, y'all.
And Lori.
Hey, everyone.
Are here to help me make sure that we get the most delicious sips of story and sanity out of this experience. So today we have someone special with us. For the last several episodes, I've been interviewing former clients, and today I've got a new friend here who hasn't been one of my clients, but we have struck up a fun friendship, and I really wanted his insight on this podcast. So Lonny Webb is a leader and expert who helps people change the tough behaviors with which they struggle. In his career of over 20 years, he has demonstrated his place at the crosshairs of effectiveness and compassion. He is frequently asked to speak to professionals and organizations and on current issues and trends in the field of clinical psychology and social work. So I took this tiny little snippet out of your bio.
Good, that's good.
But it's, you have these decades of working with people in all different places. So I would love for you to kind of share a little bit more about your background and your specialty, just to kind of set the tone for today.
Okay. Well, I had a little bit of probably an odd beginning in that I had an early start. So at the age of 19, I was the unit psychologist at the state hospital in Idaho. And so that people think of things like the movie Doogie Howser or something. We have this young person doing it. Yeah, it's probably not like that. It's a lot more scary. And the first day I walked out onto a unit and saw that I was going to be responsible for 55 adult humans, that was kind of a shocker. Instead of it being exciting, it was like you had to go breathe in a corner for a minute. But it led to some interesting patterns that kind of still occur today. But I worked there for about 5 years, working with, as the new person, you're also given some of the more difficult clients. With it being a state facility, some people, at least at that facility, weren't exactly driven to do the hard work. And so the new guy got all those cases, which helped me develop a specialty in really difficult clinical presentations. I worked with psychiatrists during that time. I was promoted. They say it was a promotion. I'm not sure still if it was a promotion, but to work at the prison in Idaho. And as the psychiatric treatment coordinator at the prison in Idaho, I got even a wider gamut of behaviors and issues to deal with, including an execution. In an execution, the condemned, they say, is given the opportunity to work with a pastor or with a clinician, and he picked a clinician, which meant, as an odd system, here I am working with a person who is condemned to be executed by the company I work for. And so that's an interesting situation to be in. From there, I went to Oregon because I had that experience, and Oregon was about to execute 2 more patients. Suddenly that became the thing I'm known for, is the guy that can work with people who are going to be executed. So that's that's not what I got in the field for. But really, moreover, what they really wanted was somebody who could work with the difficult behavior that prison offers. And so me and one other person worked with 14,000 inmates. And so obviously we could only work with the worst, the biggest cases, the ones that were going to hit the news the next day kind of things. Anyone that in Oregon in 1997 to 2007, if you read it in the paper, if you saw a startling case, that was probably my case. Anything that went on at the prison that was, that again required emergency responses and fire trucks and everyone to come running for a hostage situation, that was going to be my case. So in 2007, I left the prison and went into private practice, really thinking, what am I going to be able to do? Like, who needs this? Like, who needs what I do? Well, interesting. I kind of by the end thought of myself as literally the end of the road. I mean, the prison, for most of the guys I work with, the people that are there life without and the death row inmates, which were all my guys, that's the end of the road. And so when I left, I thought, who's going to need somebody who does what I do? Well, it turned out everyone really that comes to psychotherapy, at least the ones that come to me, they feel they're at the end of the road. They feel like that they're at a spot where there's nothing left for them. They've tried everything they know how to try. Now, concurrent with that is a different storyline, and that's having met my wife in 2000, and met her in 99 at a conference where I learned. But now, starting also early means that my experience with dating and stuff was pretty limited. So my introduction to my to-be wife was, "Don't you know who I am?" And
How'd that go over?
turned out that's not an effective line. Well, maybe it is. We got married, but at first it wasn't an effective pickup line. I didn't know it was a pickup line. But she was doing a presentation on a study of rats that she had done at Western Washington University. And she had even gotten into that because she wanted to show people how research could be done in an extremely humane way with animals, not on animals. And so she had done these really wonderful studies, and it caught my attention mainly because in the creative process, her style, the style of posters, if you've never been to a psychological conference, students often present posters, and posters are trifold poster boards with typewritten 12 font, probably 6 pages of summaries and data. And again, at the time, hand-drawn graphs, because we didn't have fancy stuff then in the early 90s. I mean, it was hard to get a hold of those things, but sometimes computer created graphics. But again, an 8.5 by 11 on a poster board, and you'd have to kind of walk by and squint at these things and then read some while the student's waiting expectantly for some questions to be asked. And then you can answer that question, and the person usually moves on. Well, the thing that caught my attention, I had a friend there with me now. At the time, I looked sort of like I do now, except I had even longer hair. And my friend that was with me that I brought had dreadlocks down to the top of his pants. So we were two that stood out. We didn't look like the rest of the people there. We both had on black leather biker jackets and sunglasses, and we looked like we're going to rob the place, not be students. And we walked up. When I saw Christine's, what stopped me was suddenly there was one that was in color, and it had cutout rats, felt rats with googly eyes and pipe cleaner tails. And as I was walking around and pointing out things to my friend and explaining to him what this research was and what that meant, that one stopped me, and I went, well, you're not supposed to do that. You don't have, like, you don't use colors, and what do you have? And then hers was telegraphic. So it means just when you looked at it, within like looking at the 3 panels, you could tell what the research was. It didn't have it written in 12 font. It had it written in 148 font and just said like what the summary was in like 3 easy words or something. And so I went, but then it hit me, well, why doesn't everyone? That's actually a much better way. I mean, I actually know what I don't have to walk up and squint and be awkward for 5 minutes while I'm reading, a 30-sentence summary to go, oh, I see what you did. Hers said it clearly. So I thought, huh. But what was more fun about this was that when she went to explain her research, she used the example of prisons. Well, I was there to do I was the keynote speaker about prisons. And so my talk was called Building Constructive Prison Environments. And so when she said her example about prisons, I went, well, don't you know who I am? I'm the guy, that's what I'm going to be. And I have the presenter ribbon, and all this. And so later she ended up inviting me up to Western Washington to give a talk to what's called the Centennial Group, which was for the 100th anniversary of Western. So I was the keynote speaker of that event for the psychology department. And from there, we just developed this great friendship over, she had this creative style. And so though we're both studying psychology, we're almost studying the opposite ends. Mine is in, well, and it kind of goes back and forth too, because hers was definitely in the most basic of research because it was with animals. Mine was in the most applied area as it was with human inmates. But reverse it, I'm the most scientific of the two. She'd kick me if I said that right now with her here. But mine has always been about data and research and outcomes. And hers has been more about the heart, the spirit, the soul, and how people feel. Though it just kind of keeps crisscrossing. So sort of like a slinky, we have always had this system where I'll come home with a book and we'll read that together. I like to read out loud, and she likes to listen out loud. And so we'll bring, we'll have books that we're constantly, it's almost what is funny. I think when we go anywhere, we probably have 10 books between us that we are carrying around in this bag. And then whenever we can sit down, we'll whip out the book and just wherever we are, we'll begin to read something to each other. And so mine would be, right now, mine might be on litigation and expert testimony. And hers, in fact, I just saw it when we left, is called Oneing, Oneing, Oneing. And it's a Jungian book on spiritual psychology, basically, and with a foreword by a Catholic priest and a summary by a person, a specialist in the Enneagram. So that's her. And so what is made known when you go to graduate school for psychology, one of the very first things they sort of warn you is, if you're doing any type of in-depth personal work that's really growing you, and your partner, whoever that is, friends too, if they aren't growing, then you're apt to leave them, right? You begin to make advances and you begin to move forward in a way that if the other person sees this as being, goofy or weird, or it's just, it takes up all your time, then you begin to grow apart. And one of the things that kind of keeps us together is the feeling that we're sort of on similar planes. Mm-hmm. And so sort of like a slinky, Christine and I have done that our whole career. We've had times where we're, in a sense, we're not growing, but we may be doing things like growing babies or growing a business or growing our house or something like that. And so maybe we're not reading or, spiritually or, from an internal perspective, growing as much. But then we have times when there's a lot of that going on. And so one of us will move forward and it kind of has to bring the other one up. And so one thing that's just been really fortunate is that, we've maintained an interest in what each other's doing enough that it's still exciting. I mean, when I get done at work to go home after, this is my 30th year of doing this. It's still exciting when I go home to tell her about my day, and she's excited to tell me, like right now she's involved in a conference that's been going on this week. It's a Zoom conference, but the end of January 25th, she'll go back to Egypt for a month to study the ancient traditions of what's called the fourth way, which is a spiritual path that kind of, well, it's an ancient system, and it's one of the things that she uses in her practice to help in coaching and help people through. And so that's kind of where she's developed her interest since then. Well, we keep those going together, because if I honestly didn't keep up with some of this, I would lose. I wouldn't be able to track what she's even talking about. Some of the language would change. It would, I might have judgment on what that sounds like. That sounds goofy, or that sounds weird. But if I know what she's talking about, because my background is in neuroscience and in psychology, I'm having to, really keep, so there's nothing I can deny about what she's saying. I have to go, no, that's okay. We might have different words for it, but I know what you're talking about. So our backgrounds are kind of intertwined, and though they're different areas, because we're talking about humans, it's the same thing. And so, which is in fact what I thought was so interesting about what you were doing, was that I recognized the same way I'm recognizing in her spiritual work. I recognized in a chapter I read of a book that you had coached. I'm going, hey, I know what that was that she was doing. I mean, that's interesting. She's using tactics and strategies that I use in therapy, but she's using it in this other way for a different approach. And so I use narrative therapy, and you do therapy on narratives. And so it's like, that's interesting. I never, did you get lots of training in that? I mean, how did, that was what was interesting to me.
Yeah. And that's the fun thing. So you said so much, like I want to dive into all of it. I'm going to try to do it in a way that will be most helpful for listeners. Is so the first thing is that we were connected through one of my clients who's one of your colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
And Lori Bonavere wrote this incredible book. And then she wrote an incredible chapter about her process of writing the book. And so the book is a choose your own outcome style. You don't have to crush your ex fiction, where she gives readers the opportunity to make choices. Remember those choose your own adventure books that we used to read when we were little, and like, okay, they make the choice here and we go over here. So it's kind of designed like that. And it's based on all of these characters that she's worked with in 20 plus years of working with high conflict divorce situations. So here she is writing the book, shows up at a retreat, and people will have to listen to her. She's going to be interviewed next week because it's phenomenal. I don't want to give too much away, but I had this awareness when she stepped into the space that there was more than a fiction story going on, right? I think both Teddy and Lori were at that retreat. And so just to kind of set the stage, 3 weeks before that retreat, my personal relationship in my marriage spun way out of, like, we've always had challenges, but it was like one of those peaks that I was like, what in the world? Like, I cannot get a break. And then, I have a retreat coming. I wonder if that's going to be a thing. And so everyone steps into the space, and I do this, I don't know if I told you, Lonny, but I do this really weird intuitive exercise with my clients, because, I'm sure you experience this too when you're working with someone. Like, you always want the person to come to the thing on their own, right? Because then it's theirs.
It has to have an agreement, we call it. Yeah.
And so we are always kind of treading that. How do we ask the right questions? How do we, and so one thing that I had noticed for 10 years is I would get that, well, Amanda said, and I'd be like, I need to find a different way of getting them to this, their own answer about this, where they can't be like, well, Amanda said it was this story, but I don't really understand. So I have this whole exercise that we do. It's kind of like a constellation exercise. And I'm completely removed. I'm literally just witnessing the thing happen and giving instructions. And at the end of it, they have all given themselves the answer about which story it will be that will block their ability to move forward with the project. Like, what is this thing going to be?
Mhm.
All 5 women in this room said intimacy. Like, my intimate relationship is all 5. Everyone got 5 options.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chose this.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, well, that's why I was doing that work for 3 weeks before this retreat, like, so that I could just like be here and not run out the door.
Yes.
So, there's this amazing thing. So she was on this journey of realizing that there were parts of the book that she was writing that were actually parts of her story. And so she asked you to read the book, right, as a reader.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then how did you hear about the You Can't Make This Story Up project? Did she?
Yeah. So we were, Lori is a great colleague friend of mine, and I had volunteered to shoot some video for her in kind of a promo that she would do, since so much of our, in addition to doing psychotherapy, I have a couple other businesses that are all in the same kind of domain, but one of those is consultation with schools. Generally, it's about student behavior and performance. So it's about, how do we help our students actually come out with an education? But more recently, and right before the pandemic, literally in November of 2019, I am presenting at the Global Innovation Forum. Whole long story about how I got there. I was supposed to be presenting a moment with a friend from Nike, and instead I ended up doing the whole half hour in front of a group of inventors, talking about the creative parts of the brain. And that's what I thought I was going to be doing. I ended up doing a half hour on a revolution that's needed in education. And I got these guys all fired up, and the gals that were just, amazing inventors. But my interest there was schools. And so with school consultations during the pandemic, those stopped because schools went they kind of retreated back to this more basic function. They're just trying to survive right now and not get their superintendents fired. And so, everything has become really basic. So I got all this video equipment so I could do video productions and do my trainings by video and send those. So I told Lori that, I could shoot some video of you. And she said, that'd be great. But to do that, it was like she had to set me up with what this video, like what this meant. And so we went out to breakfast, and she told me the whole story, basically, of the chapter she wrote. I didn't know that was going to be a chapter she had written. She just told me she said, I have to tell you about this person, Amanda, and like what it means, because she had been referring to you as her writing coach, but she always kind of stammered over the word. Like she would say, my right, well, she's like a coach, but not like a writer, because I know writing coaches. We do, whenever we try to do a foray out into producing some nonfiction, but something that's going to be readable, my stuff always sounds so dry. I mentioned to you one time that when I wanted to tell my wife I liked her for the first time, I wrote her a card, and then I realized I'd never written a romantic card. And so I just like, what do you say? And so I just said, I find you. And then I drew the scientific notation for reinforcing that she would notice. SR, it's S to the R plus, means I find her reinforcing, which is the highest praise I could give her. And she knew that. So she got it, luckily. But my romantic, I literally, I have to take a quick side. She still has framed in her office this beautiful poem that I wrote her. Then I printed it out on this Celtic paper, and it's rolled up at the edges, and it's got wax and stamps and all, beautiful, and it's still framed. And she thought that was the most wonderful thing I had ever written, until she went to transcribe it onto Facebook to show everyone, like, Lonny wrote this. I'm just gonna, so she typed it. And as she did, it was autofilling when she went, and then she moved it over to Safari, and it brought up the poem. Because of course I didn't write that. Keats wrote that. I couldn't write that. I didn't say I wrote that. I just found a beautiful poem for you, and I printed it nicely. That's what my present was. But she was telling everyone what an amazing poet I was. So, and how I suddenly changed. So it was important for Lori to explain like who you were to someone who I see everything through these. My title is clinical and forensic social work, right? So I see everything through these very black and white things. And Lori knows that enough to know you have to explain Amanda to you. So she told me, in a sense, the story of the chapter. And I was surprised kind of throughout the whole thing because I was having reactions. The first time when she said, so they brought us together in this room, and she explains, I think you guys were like out in the gorge or something. And she said, and she brings us together. And the very first thing is she says something, okay, something like, and I could hash this up here. I don't have it memorized, but it was something like, okay, I want you guys all to get ready to tell your story or something. And I was already going, oh, I'm out. Oh, wait, I'm just having to listen. Okay. Well,
I'm not even at the retreat and I'm done.
Yeah, right? It's just like, whoa. And then all the stuff that what I noticed there was that, and this is one thing I noticed with my wife as well. Well, because I'm the licensed person and she never pursued that route, I actually have a ton of expectations and restrictions that aren't always common sense. I mean, they aren't always maybe the thing that I should do. It's sort of an accepted, like I have bought into the way my field does this. So for example, if you come to my office, you won't hear me ask, how are you when you walk in? I'm not going to ask that because you'll always say fine. And then 2 minutes later go, well, but okay, not fine. Right. So we don't want to start you off with, how are you doing? And then have the person have to backtrack and say, I'm not so well. I have to be careful when I'm working with women for how big I sit. Because I'm 6'2" and we sit kind of close. So if I sit up to my full height, and one of her problems is, let's say in a being oppressed in a marriage, I can take the role of her husband and suddenly she's not going to talk to me at all, really. So I have to be aware of how, I have to sit back in my chair and rock back and get small and not use my hands or anything that might cause people to freak. So all of these things play into me, whereas people that don't have that restriction are free to use what works and what would be helpful and mix and match strategies and approaches. And that's what I was hearing in all this, is just a ton of effective approaches. In fact, I'll say one more that's funny. I can answer anything else, but one that was funny was I was listening to her and she said, and then she hands out this chocolate. And I went, and she said, what? And I said, does she know about lecithin and its effect on anxiety? And she said, what? And I said, I mean, did she know that chocolate actually does keep away the Dementors, like in Harry Potter? Like that, I mean, it actually
only by experience, sir.
It's
only
like,
by
right?
experience.
But it's so much more real than if I said, I've heard, here, take this tincture and you'll feel better. I heard, versus I take this every morning because it helps me. And so the process that she talked about was extremely intimate, which again is a thing that's lacking in a lot of lives, and especially in lives where that has separated, where one person again is growing or changing or seeking to grow and change, and the other person believes, it's only a belief, but they believe they're quite fine where they're at. Like, why do we need to change? So the other person's growing and changing, and it's almost like we need some sort of lubricant, because that stretching process hurts. And so what can lubricate that? Well, people use, men especially, will use alcohol, marijuana, things like this. But I could even get into the specific part of the brain, but the anterior cingulate gyrus, which is kind of responsible for this part of the brain, it will respond to several things, right? Warm, loving touch is what it's really after, right? And so a stroke, especially from the base of your head to your tailbone, if you think just ancient stuff here, as an animal, nothing would let you touch its backbone. So if you're able to stroke someone's backbone from the top down to the bottom, you're safe, right? And so that safe touch is comforting, and that's kind of what this is going for. But if it can't get that, it will accept sex. It will accept cutting, like physical damage to our body. That triggers the same part of the brain. This doesn't have to make sense. It's neuroscience. Interestingly, alcohol, opiates can affect that. But oddly, and I think the most interesting thing is carbohydrates. So when I have a teen girl come into my office that say, it's so weird, I've been craving Wendy's and French fries, I go, oh, so you're missing, who are you missing? Or what happened? What do you say? Do you feel estranged from your parents right now? You know, like, wow, how did you? And they always see it as like magic, like I'm some kind of mind reader, when instead it's just saying, I know, guess why you wanted that croissant this morning? Is like, tell me about your intimate life. And we don't know this, but we're not, intimacy doesn't mean sex. Intimacy is a closeness, like of spirit. And all of this stuff that she talked about with your approach was this a closeness. Like we can't get close if we don't get real. So it sounded to me at least, and I don't know if this is true or not, but it sounded to me at least like we got real fast. And that sort of ripping the Band-Aid off is a way to do it. I mean, in other cultures, it might be like a sweat together, which is where we're going to, take off a lot of clothes. We're not going to be naked. We're going to take off we might be naked, and we're going to sit in a domed area full of heat. Why? Now we're close. Now we're all really close right now. Sitting in a small space with the option to leave. I mean, it's not, prison, but with an option to leave. But let's start sharing. And it sounded like you kind of rode the wave, where if things get uncomfortable or whatever, it's okay, but we're still going to do this. And there was lots of like loving pressure applied. That's the fuel to get this thing done. When our spouses, if they let off the pressure, that's kind of what we don't need. If I'm having trouble and I need some support, I really don't want someone to say, oh, you should take a break. That's all. I know that's already what I want to do. I need to have somebody that goes, well, we're going to do this. And it's not like there was a lot of time. She just had one funny story about leaving into town at some point, had a break or something. Yep. And the effect of like, there's almost kind of like the undercurrent there is you're almost expecting her to split. Right. Like to just, I'm going home, I'm not coming back. And so here's an interesting neuro thing too. Neural pathways are grown when the axon, the dendrites, when they move, they actually physically, your neurons they spin basically. The most recent research out of MIT, I was at a conference before COVID hit us in New York, and then we went up to Boston, and we got to see the neurons actually rotating. What the fuel to rotate the neuron is cortisol. Cortisol is a neurotoxin that's in our body. Cortisol is most associated with stress, but we know, and everybody feels this, that at the leading edge of change is anxiety, right? You feels a little uncomfortable when we're changing. It has to. And so therefore, when we're a little bit uncomfortable, not scared, not anxious, not triggered, not, responding to some previous trauma, but rather when we're kind of riding that anxiety wave, because anxiety comes as a wave, it comes and it goes, right? But if we ride that wave, change follows. And then that feels good. That feels control, right? And so by being able to ride that through with people, I think what you're doing is you're able to bring, I think you've even said it this way, but the thing that Lori started with was that she did not write the story she thought she was going to write. She had story A. There wasn't really a story. It's just you have this concept. And it wasn't this. And that was that is every person that comes into my office comes in complaining of something. And sometimes it's that, but more often than not, I'll go, yeah, it's not that. Yeah. In fact, I'm surprised with a lot of the women I work with, and men, I understand, hate this, but as I'm listening, I go, oh, it's your husband. Can he come into this? Because he's not going to believe you. He's going to just think like you said something bad about him when you haven't said anything. I notice it though. And so can I talk to him? Because if I can talk to him, I can start to help, because we got to get caught up here and we got to have a mutual reason, to do this work. And so in an individual way, that's a lot of what I saw in her chapter. So it's so interesting to me, because then I said, who is this person? Like, is she a psychotherapist? Because what does she do? I mean, she does right. What is this? And that was when I got interested. And then I got to meet you when we did the video, and I got to see some of the process, kind of your supportive approach back there. Now, I know it's not your process. That was not you doing this, but I got to see some of that. And we've talked a couple times since. And so it's just been more and more intriguing. And it's a wonderful thing, because we need more healers out there, right? We need more people that use different processes. What if therapy to you, my thing I tell all young kids when I start with them is when I say, do you know what my job is? And they'll kind of go like, yeah, you're a therapist and you're psycho something. I don't, know. And I'll say, my job is to make therapy not suck. Okay, because if it sucks and you're left with that impression at this tender age, just like an investment, that's going to grow and you'll never be back. And believe me, your future wife or husband might really need you to go to therapy and make it work. But if your impression of it is it's hooky, stupid, weird, I didn't like it, I got picked on, whatever, then, it's not going to work. And so that's, so we need a bunch of different vehicles to get change in there, because some people don't need that. This type of work isn't necessarily clinical. It's deep psychology, it's called, and that's working on the depth of someone's person and spirit. And there has to be different ways to do that. For some, it's a church. For some, it's a monastery. For some, it's a yogi, right? This is another one is writing and writing for change. I use journaling in prison to work with inmates. I had them write about stuff. So they could reflect and hear what they're saying, right? Very different process. I wish I would have thought about this process, because that would have been more what they needed. But I honestly don't think I could have provided it. I think I was already by then so bought into a method of how you approach these problems. It probably would be hard for me to break out of that. So it's very interesting to see what you've done.
Yeah. And it's really, Teddy has been with me since the very first retreat. So she knows that this is all, I used to walk in with like my PowerPoints and specific exercises, and this is what we're going to do. And I had it figured out. And then she was the first person like fall on the ground in tears and make me realize like, oh, this isn't going to work. But over time, I've done less and less and less of the preparation, because what I've realized is that people are being drawn to writing or other types of art, or, these other types of things that end up being therapeutic.
Mm-hmm.
I think for that reason,
Mm-hmm.
like, yes, the mental intention is I want to change the world with my expertise. I want to inspire people because I overcame this and they can too. But like on the inside, there's so much more that wants to happen.
Absolutely.
And, frankly, my job is to just try to stay out of the way and try to keep the person feeling as safe as possible through the process. Because as soon as they feel unsafe, they're out. Like they can't.
That's right.
They can't sustain it. So
that's so interesting. I'm apt here to do a very male thing, and that is describe what you just said in different words.
Do it. We have male listeners.
Well, here's one thing. It's just really, I think if I had to interpret what you're saying to a group of psychologists, what I think we would recognize is that what you're actually dealing with there is the ego defense, right? And that the ego is so weird. It's not us. Our personality isn't us. Our personality is like a wound. It's sort of, I developed this over time. I'll say things like, oh, I don't dance. Okay, why don't you dance? Do you not dance because it doesn't, like if you just lay down your defense for a second, do you not dance because you don't want to feel joyful and you don't want to feel free and you don't want to express, that yourself in that way? Or do you not dance because of something that was embarrassing? Because if you say the latter, then it's not you, it's your reaction to something. But it becomes what I call me, which is weird, because then if I'm saying there's something called me, who just said that? Right? So now how do I observe the me if I'm talking about it as if it's now this third person and I can see it? That's the ego structure, right? And so really what you're talking about is you are very conscious of triggering an ego response because that's not them. And of course, just like if I took your photograph, if I showed you a photograph, well, imagine this, every person you've ever met left with a different version of you than you are, right? Yep. If you were smiley in the store this morning and really gregarious and being kind of silly, that person's snapshot of you is a personality, kind of the whole thing, and it went off in that direction. And that's not you, that's maybe a fragment of you. In fact, there's a book called A Fragment of a Miraculous Past. I think it's called Fragments, but it's this thing that my wife's training on right now. I mean, she would so much be able to get in here and get into depth on this. And in fact, when I left, she was on a phone call with her friend in Chicago where they were doing this just themselves. But you're talking there about, not triggering someone's ego, because then you're going to get sort of like if you go into a party right now, if the four of us were in a party and we hadn't met yet, I'm likely to come up to you and say, hi, my name's Lonny. What do you do? Right? As a male, you're likely to say, hi, my name's Lori. But tell me about your family. Are you married? Do you have kids? You know, where do you live? Right? And those are just how we're acculturated, right? That's how we are socialized to behave. You're saying, I don't want that response because it's not actually you. That's what we're trained to be. You know, if I'm on a panel with 3 women psychiatrists, the questions come to me. When those women actually outrank me, medical field's very militaristic, right? They have MDs. I have an MSW. They outrank me. You should ask them. But because I'm male, all the questions come to me. And then I have to look, I look chivalrous or I look gallant. It's not. It's me going, they know more than I do. Ask them. I can answer questions about other things, but ask them. And so you're trying to tear through that by not accidentally triggering the, what book do you want to write? Okay, chapter 1, let's just start writing instead of going, no, how do you know in this? How do you know what you know?
Yeah.
You know, and this one is always a fun one. How do you know when you're wrong? What does wrong feel like? Well, if I ask that, I can even show you. So Teddy, right? What does it feel like to be wrong?
My face flushes.
Yeah.
My chest tightens.
Yeah. Respectfully, no. That's what it feels like to be caught being wrong. What does it feel like to be wrong? Well, exactly what it feels like to be right until you're wrong, right? How do we know we're wrong? I don't know I'm wrong. I wouldn't have said it if I thought it was wrong, right? I said it because I thought it was right. And then someone went, no, actually, that's a pint, not a cup. Oh, okay, now I get all those things. But right before then, I was sure a pint and a cup were the same thing. Felt the same. So if you remove that veil by saying, in a sense, we're not going to make assumptions, and there isn't right or wrong, and there isn't these things that we're kind of normally used to putting up, then you're starting to strip off the ego. When you do things that kind of feel a little bit like you need to escape, like a room full of everyone, and you say stuff like, we're going to bear an intimate secret right now. Ready? That strips something off, right? It causes at first a big flare up, like, I will not. I'm leaving. Where's my purse? You know? And in fact, getting to see some of the chapters from You Can't Make the Shit Up or Stuff Up or whatever the S stands for. I always assumed it was shit. I don't know. Now
it kind of is, but
okay,
the word is story.
Yeah. So that was almost universal, right? Yeah. Is people going, escape, run away, right? So we tend to only want to escape aversive situations. But imagine what you're saying if you're saying, so you wanted to escape a soft question that encourages intimacy and you want to split. Yeah. Aw. How long has it been since you've been able to be open and be that soft part? That's what that's what it's defending, is what's perceived as this super soft part that's actually not soft. Now you can edit this next part out, so I'll put a pause here. Because what do we in our Western society call someone who is super soft? And it's a pejorative word. Men are being what when they're doing this? It's a part of an anatomy. Yep, Teddy, being a pussy. Yet, I don't want to get too anatomical here, but if we want to think about a tough part of the body, a part of the body that can actually put up with some stuff and it can do all kinds of amazing things, actually quite robust as a body part goes. In fact, if you wanted to talk about something being tender, it wouldn't be that body part. I got some ideas for you, but you wouldn't say that. You would say, stop acting like testicles. You know, that's soft. That's woundable, right? Vaginas aren't. And so isn't it weird that we're trying to protect this part of us that actually is quite robust? It's actually quite tough because it's us and it's really who we are. But we put up all these things because we assume somehow, weirdly, that it's soft and it needs to be protected. And so, no, I don't want to tell you what my most intimate story is, because then what?
Yeah.
Well, that's weird. Yeah. And it turns out that in therapy, especially when you're talking about trauma, that one of the impacts of trauma is that trauma tends to freeze us. In fact, our whole approach in therapy is to get that unfrozen, is to get them to be able to talk about it, right? To get them to be able to say, like, I didn't know what was going on, or I didn't know I didn't know I was being misused or abused. I was too young, or I didn't understand that what gaslighting was, and so I was beat up and for years in this relationship, and I didn't even know it, and they didn't know it. And so our job there in therapy is to get people to talk about it. Well, that's interesting because that's a narrative form, right? It's just verbal versus written. So what is more powerful? We also know that when you write things down, you remember more, you record more, especially when you do it longhand, right? What's happening is like, wow, you have a process that avails itself to deal with a lot of the deep stuff that's going on in people, and at the same time produce something that they were really wanting to produce, enough to go to a workshop, right? That they wanted to produce something, but it's kind of like, surprise, it's not going to be for that. I mean, you're still going to get one. It's like, I know you came here to buy a car, but you're going to leave with a house and a car.
Right.
Right. And so what you really needed was a house. You don't have a place to put the car. You don't have a garage. So I need you to make sure you get your garage on the way out. Well, that's a lot bigger than a car. Yep, I think so. In fact, I think the summary of every story is it's more than the sum of its parts, right? The process that they went through is for them so much more valuable than if I would have just said, you know what, I already knew what you were coming here for today, and here's your book. I wrote it for you. That's kind of what you wanted, right?
Yeah.
You wanted it to be.
I used to do that. I used to ghostwrite for people.
Okay, there you go.
I did. And I would see them like stand on stage afterwards and not have it in them. There was something that they weren't getting through the process.
Yeah.
That, I mean, Lori has been an excellent social worker and teacher and educator for 20 years. But when she talks about this stuff now, there's a completely different quality. And she was just texting me the other day. It's like just more of her showing up, even in, as an expert witness, even as like in all these things that she's been doing for 20 years, she is having this experience of like, there's just more of me available.
Yeah,
to
100%. This is where I so wish my wife was here. I'd just slide off screen, because this is what she does. And it is the hard work, right? And in fact, it's called a practice, right? Because you have to keep doing this. You can't, well, I suppose you could stop, but wouldn't that be a shame? Wouldn't that be a waste? It's like, how do you keep this process going? Because it's life-giving, right? It's not necessary for life, because the way we refer to it is when we're not doing this kind of work, we're automatic. Some spiritual practices call it a sleep. The Bible says over and over, wake up, sleeper. Right? It says it over and over. It says, don't be the man that walks away from the mirror and forgets his face. Like, don't forget what we're doing here. Right? But wake up. Wake up. And this is awakening, because you're awakening to the beautiful, you're awakening to the ugly, you're awakening to real. And then we get into Jungian psychology or even the movie The Matrix. Do you want the blue pill or the red pill? Because you can either fall back asleep and eat your imaginary steak, or you can wake up to the ugly fact of what's going on, but it's real and it's living. And you can just feel that when you're next to people who are alive. And you can also, by the way, obviously, you can also feel it next to people who are dead, right? People who are asleep, because they're so entranced, like hypnotism. They're so entranced by their ego that they have a whole story going on in their head. And we know that only when you make that exterior, where I can see it. Have you ever had that where you have a fib you told as a kid, something that at the time was super important, and you're like, oh, I, met Michael Jackson. Okay. And then as you get older, you hear yourself tell that story. It comes up in a party and you go, oh.
Yep.
Well, you realize right then, I don't need the story anymore. Like, I have other things. I don't need the story, but that's so weird. I used to actually say blank, right? That's where we've made something exterior. right? This person so wounded me in my life, I never recovered. Wait, I'm here. No, I did. I did recover. Yeah, that's weird. How long have I been saying I didn't, how long have I said that they took something from me that could never be replaced, yet here I am. That was a thing I used as a coping strategy at the time. That's not true. So one of the approaches that we use on that, and I'm being interested, do you use repeating questions in your practice? Right?
Yeah.
So that type of inquiry model is so, first of all, bugs the crap out of people.
Yep.
Because when I say something like, tell me something that you think is true, but might not be true. And then they answer and they say, that I'm not attractive. Tell me something that you think is true, but might not be true. And of course, the immediate human responses go, I just did. Can we be done? Like you're already trying to escape, right? You don't like this line of thinking. Let's try it again. Tell me something, and then that begins, it's like layers of an onion, right? It just begins to peel. And again, consciously or not, I don't know where you're getting all this from, but you're using, 7, 8 different approaches sort of at once skillfully in a way that doesn't hurt, but in a way that does get people to kind of softly begin to recognize that there is something down there deep that maybe needs to come out. But I almost guarantee it can't come out unless we do it this way, because you won't even be aware of it. How many of the stories, and you've read more than I have, you've had more experience, but how many of them are like, I didn't even know I needed to talk about that.
Yep. Well, all of them.
That's right. That's thawed. That's when you went, he really hurt me. Oh, and the tears. We need chocolate and we need a break, we need to go for a little walk. It's all of that is this deep psychology work that I think so many, in fact, I don't know anyone that couldn't do better with that. I'll tell you one quick story on that. I went to a friend of mine wanted to go to Florida recently. This is during COVID, and the flights were weird and everything. And he's like, he's a great guy, but he's like, hey, I want a posse. And I said, a what? And he said, like a group of people, I want friends to come with me. And I said, oh, and he said, so I'm paying for everything. Just, do you want to come with me? We're going to go to this championship tennis match. And I want to take you. And I said, I don't know anything about tennis. And he's like, it doesn't matter. So we're going to go. So I did learn I do not like tennis, but we went there. And what was so interesting was that right after we got there, I really wished my wife was with me. But what was weird was I could tell it was a selfish want. It wasn't like, oh, because it'd be so fun. And I did think that some, or because she's my partner and I want her. It wasn't that. There was something else. And it took me a little bit until I finally called her. And I said, it's weird. I said, this whole trip, I haven't stopped working since I got here. I mean, everyone is pulling me aside and they're this type of process. We're doing, I'm not getting a break. And I said, I so wish you were here. She goes, you wish I was here because I normally take that over for you. And I went, yes, Donnie, that's it. If you're here, I can say something witty and everyone goes, wow. And then they'll go, but, and then I step back and Christine steps in and then she fields all the heavy work while I look cool. I go off and have a cocktail and then come back and go, and furthermore, and I say one thing and then I can leave. And so I'm the one doing the splitting because I know it's coming, as I know it's going to get deep and that there's going to be, there's coming soon, there's going to be tears and then kind of awakening. And then, but I'm going, no, I thought we were going on vacation. So I was hoping about the beach and I literally brought snorkel equipment. And instead we're at the house rental and I have group sessions going on because these are 5 men and weirdly aged 28 to 64 and in various states of engagement. And one was down there for their bachelor party and one was going to get engaged. And one is just almost celibate. I mean, has no relationship with anybody. But all of them needing this kind of work, but as men really struggling to have these kind of talks. And so these always occurred really early, 6 a.m, sitting out by the pool with a cup of coffee. Again, why?
Before the defenses are up.
That's it. Exactly.
It's so true.
Exactly.
Teddy, you remember the first few retreats when I figured this out? People would just be like, this lady probably other words, names that they use. But she is keeping us up until like freaking midnight telling our
Yes.
stories. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that's because after 9 o'clock, you get tired and you start giving me the content that I need to support
Yes.
you.
I love it.
Before then, it's completely, it's all of the pretenses, all of the ego stuff. It's all the,
Yes.
this is what I know, but
It-
this is how I'm feeling.
You know what? And when you had sleepovers, when did things get real?
Oh,
You know,
exactly.
1 o'clock in the morning, laying next to your friends going, but I hate him. I actually hate him. I don't want to date this guy. He's really not nice. That's when real came out, not earlier. No, he is the captain of the football team and he's the most wonderful person. And it's okay that he doesn't want to hold my hand in public because I don't. Fast forward. I hate being treated like a piece of meat. I hate that,
Yeah.
Right. And so it's, again, I don't know how you know that, but don't doubt it because there's something there. I have to say this. The only way I do a lot of my work, it must be God. It must be the universe. It must be something bigger than me that wants this to come out, because how could I know that? I mean, how did you figure that out? Now, if I had to do that same thing, I would spend the next 5 days researching academic articles. And what's weird is, unless someone paid to research that, it won't even be in there.
Right.
Right. I mean, if anything, it might be in a student's paper who's just positing a thought. Like, I wonder, but what clinics run at midnight?
Yeah.
Mine is 7 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
So when you come into me, boy, you got your best defense on.
Yep.
And so it takes my whole session to take apart. In fact, we even have a thing. Lori, you're a social worker too?
No.
Oh, what do you do? Do you do work in this area?
No, I do not actually.
Okay. Well, we have a theory in social work, in clinical practice, called the Doorknob Theory. And the Doorknob Theory is, the session's over, we've just finished everything. On the way out, they grab the doorknob and they turn around and they say, by the way, I haven't told my boyfriend yet I'm pregnant. And you go, well, hold on, come back, sit down, tell the other people we're going to be late. Or I literally have had a dad come in the meeting late after we've been working for a long time on their kids. And the dad comes to the meeting late and he sits down, he's kind of flustered because he's about half an hour late. And he's kind of like, well, where are we? And I'm explaining, kind of catching up, like, well, I was checking in with your wife. She said this has been going on. And he goes, oh, yeah, I have one thing. I'm filing for divorce. Well, wow. Okay, that was unexpected, So how long does it take into a session during the day to get into it? Sometimes the truth is we never do.
Mm-hmm.
We never do. And so by using that tactic, again, early or late, I'm probably better at putting on some defenses. I could probably put them on more quickly because I'm used to going to work, right?
Yeah.
But after work, it really is. It's like a diminishing effect until finally at one point, like, I can't lift it anymore. Here's real me. Here's the real thing going on. So I think those are wonderful. I think it's going to take a lot of different approaches, to be able to help people find this. But I think what'll be your interesting charge, and you've probably been working on this, but how do you keep it going past, the book, past the sort of final product? Because I think you're going to find people hungry for. My wife's in a year-long Enneagram course, so it's really a deep course. It's really kind of getting into the intricacies of this work. If you haven't looked up the Enneagram and its sort of ancient system, it's very interesting, but it's also kind of self-exfoliate, where it kind of says, yeah, but you're not this either, right? It's even bigger than this. So after a year of 3 times a week work in this, where it's super deep, at some point she started worrying, well, it's coming to an end though. So what are we going to do then? And I think that's when we know that we have some, like, how do we keep it? How do you keep groups, or how do you keep, and especially if, again, we don't have it at home.
Yep.
And that person's, now seen the benefit, not only of doing it, but of being available for others who haven't done it yet. Because if you've all done it, you all know what it feels like. It's why in my field, we have to have been in psychotherapy to provide psychotherapy. because you need to have gone through it to go, I also thought I didn't have anything. I also thought that the problem was what I said it was. And then I found out, nope, I've got things to do. So, it's going to be interesting to see if that's your charge, is that somebody else's, is somebody, going to come out of a group doing, I want to keep this going. And how do we have, ongoing talks? How do we have ongoing retreats? Because this isn't just, and I think that's kind of maybe the summary of what your approach is it's not just a book, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a book and.
Yeah. And, then it's the signature talk, and then it's all of their stories about being visible and being in front of people and being able to, answer questions, or it's, growing a business and being able to lead and communicate a vision. And I mean, it's all part of this amazing opportunity to get to know ourselves more.
Yeah.
But the writing is really, it's the most intense. And I think it's because it's, we can, like you said, we can tell ourselves the stories all day long, but when you write, the story gets told to you.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, that's what I actually think or believe about this.
Yes.
Huh.
It's the most difficult in my job. Is every client that comes in, I ask them to have a journal. I want them writing this stuff down for a couple of reasons. One of them is that we're going to make amazing progress relatively quickly. And if you're not noting that, if you're not writing that down, you won't attribute it to you. In fact, some of my more difficult cases are if I start a patient and then I also start medications at about the same time, they almost always will attribute the change to medication. When in all my experience, I've maybe seen a handful of cases. In 2006, the state gave me an award for seeing my 10,000th patient, as in 2006.
Wow.
I don't know what it is now, but I could tell you on one hand how many people I saw change because of medication and how many people I saw change because of effort and work. But we don't attribute that to us. And so if we're not recording it, if we're not watching it happen, kind of like your kid marking how tall they are on the side of the door, you won't see it. You won't see the growth. And that's what I think surprises partners in this, is that if they're not participating in some way in measuring this, they wake up one day. I don't know how many times I've heard, especially men say, we drifted apart, where I'd say, there's no drift. This is motored. I mean, this is effortfully moving in a different direction. And, or suddenly, suddenly she's like, there's no suddenly. It wasn't one day she came in insightful. It was over a period of 17 months. There were incremental changes that, that adage of, how do you cook a frog? You put it in boiling water, it jumps out. But if you just slowly increase the heat before they notice it, it's got them. Similar here, but positive is over time, the slow changes happen. One day a partner might wake up and go, why are you acting different?
Yep.
Right? It's like, it's not sudden. You just noticed it. You just, you haven't seen your nephew in 12 years. Well, get ready. But it wasn't sudden.
Right.
That took 12 years.
And I always see this duality that happens too. There's and I think both of these ladies have experienced it, where it's like this reconnecting with their, like, why they're really here and their true selves through this process. And that is really attractive to the partner, right? Like they're so excited to see that.
Yeah.
But also it's pushing all of their buttons, because now they're wondering, why'd that disappear and then come back again?
Yeah.
Because the last time I saw that, she was falling in love with me, right?
Yes.
Like that whole thing is just this unbelievable dynamic. So I mean, we might be trying to rope you in 2022 to talk about how to do this really effectively, because the last thing that I want to do is have people step in and become more and leave everything behind. Like, to me, there has to be, every community I've been in, like the divorce rate is just obscene.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so tired of seeing it. And I don't think there have been little things that I've been able to do over the last 10 or 15 years to kind of at least help the person I'm working with to understand the dynamics enough so that they can work with them more
Mhm.
powerfully and understand and do the, all the things to try to make it a little bit easier for the family system. But that doesn't help the family system. And I want to figure out how to do that, so
I love
we're
it. I love it. I think it would be a system like this that could work better. Because again, if you say marriage counseling, watch how many men immediately hit the door.
Yeah.
I know it's odd, really, because it's almost as if they know sometimes that they're going to have to change. And look at the ego root, where it's like, nope, 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 nope. I don't want to do that. Like you said, to soften that ego defense up, they have some of the best marriage counseling there are like week-long, stay at a therapist's home. There's one up in Washington that lives on Orcas Island, the Gottmans, probably the most famous, and you pay big bucks to go live with them, basically, in their huge house. Why? Because of this, right? Is that we're going to break through some of these defenses simply by being around each other and being able to have a session at 11:30 at night, after you've gotten food and we've raised the temperature a little bit in the room, and so you're getting sleepy, and it's like, oh, everything's softening now. We've got a fire going and it smells nice and there's candles around us, and so we just feel really relaxed. And oops, I dropped my ego. It's like the towel fell off. Yeah, and so how to, because it's not, I know enough about your approach that it's not intended to create friction, right? But if both of us aren't moving, the friction, if imagine if one of your tires on your car moves forward and the other three stay still. Okay, well, there's no intention in your car tires, but you're going to have problems steering if this is what's happening in your car. And so, and if one, even worse, if one can rotate backwards and one can rotate forward, we're going to spin. And so, how do we involve partners and intimate others, whoever they are, in that work, so that they can see that this is actually good for all of us? This isn't like, if Teddy gets her needs met, but this is the concept, the duality, right? Says if Teddy's needs are met, my needs have to be therefore impacted. I'll have fewer. When it's like, no, you're thinking again, not in this pluralistic view, as opposed to a one view. The one view is, if we're getting healthier, then we're getting healthier, right? It's not like, how can my hand be sick and the rest of my body be fine? It's like, no, this is part of me. We're part of each other. And in fact, bigger, we're all part of each other. And so, yeah, it is the charge. But I have confidence now in the system that that you'll figure out ways to involve people, and how to have people spin this out. I really believe this is sort of the concept, I think, of the original church. Was a group of people together, right, helping each other out and focusing on where this stuff is really all coming from. Not how do I make one of us wealthy and has a nice house because you all pay me to think this for you. And so we'll meet once a week and you won't think about it outside of once a week. As opposed to homework and go and name it. That was a big component of your work too, right? Is now go back and think about this a lot. Let's work on it. Like, I'm just getting you started here. Your motor's running. Now go drive.
Crappy rough drafts once a week.
There you go. Yeah. It's wonderful. Good stuff.
Good. Well, I know we only have a few minutes left. Do you ladies have any questions? You've been in this process. I mean, I love the science stuff, because it's just like, oh shoot, that's exactly what's been happening this whole time.
Yeah, I've been experiencing all these little light bulbs. Like, oh, that's why that's happening. Or when I worked with so and so, to help them, I wish I'd known that then, But I love when you said rip the Band-Aid off, and that's the best way to do it. Because we've talked about that, ripping the Band-Aid off, and how you're exposing that wound, and how do we work through that, and how do we get past it? And so I love that. It's been fun to listen to both of you because you're from two different sides of the universe, so to speak, and yet so connected and so united, you know, in the process, which is really, that's just really cool. As far as a question goes, insight onto how, okay, so you have made a lot of comments about how we need to bring each other up, you know, I mean, like bring our partners along. And I think Amanda and our community has been trying to figure out how do we do that process, you know? So any suggestions that you have as far as how do we grab hold of those partners and help them to want to come along, without saying we're going to marriage counseling,
Yeah.
you know?
Or
Yeah.
come join this cult. Because
Right.
you're like
exactly.
involved in this new way of thinking. Like we hear that all the time. Like, who is this Amanda person? And what the
Right.
hell are you doing at that cabin? You know?
Well, and
Yeah,
a lot of
absolutely.
times it appears to me that there's, just like you and your wife think completely, you know, differently. We're men and we're women, so obviously we're gonna think differently,
Sure.
and we bring that along with us too. So anyway, my question still.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, when I consult with schools, sometimes what I'm asked to do as a superintendent will say, you know, here's the problem we're having in this school in our district. And very quickly and very logically, especially a seasoned administrator, I'll listen to this and I'll say, so I've been consulting with schools since 1991. So I usually have almost as soon as they finish speaking, it's like, how many times have I heard that? So I already know what the problem is. And I even know how to fix it, usually. There's some rarities. In Oregon, we have legalized marijuana. So we have new things like marijuana grow fields right next to a school where marijuana buds are growing into the schoolyard. Yeah, I hadn't had that one before, but most of the things I've heard before, I've had things. So I already kind of know what we need to do. And but I also know, so just as a quick example, when I went into one of these school districts I'm working with, I already knew too that because of where they are, these are rural school districts often, that they already sort of expect the big city consultant to come in and tell them what to do, which is going to go over about as well as you telling your partner, hey, I heard from this expert and this is what we got to go do, right? Same thing. And so I went in, like Amanda said, I went in with my, with my completely filled out plan that I'm going to hand you, and you're going to go do that. And literally, thank God that right before I got out with my box of notebooks to hand out to these teachers, I almost heard a voice that says, take it apart. Don't do that. So I stripped it and I handed them blank notebooks. And we sat down and I said, I need to know what the problem is. What's the problem in your school from your perspective? Now, this again at home would be those areas that come up as disagreements or areas where I'm not feeling okay or whatever. And the person almost already, I mean, we almost have this dance done, right? I've been married for 20 years. It's almost like we almost want to go, do you want to have argument 4J tonight? Yeah, good. Can we call it over? Good. Let's get to the finished part because we already know what the dance is done, right? And so one teacher got upset and said, you know, how many times do we have to tell you guys what the problem is? And I said, okay, so one of the things is you're tired of telling me the problem. And they were like, don't like that you did that. You know, I was hoping to not start something. And so what I got to, and to answer your question simply, it's this: I have to ask everyone that I work with, where do you get your truth from? Where do you find truth? You know, is it the Bible? Because I can use that. Is it science? Super good at that one. Let's use science. Is it popular thought? You know, consensus? I can use that. It's like, just where do you get your truth from? Because if this is real, what we're talking about, then it has truth in it. And truth is kind of universal. Like, for instance, I can give you a truth like wisdom that comes from the Torah that comes from the Quran, that comes from Hindu thinking, that comes from my family is from a reservation in Oklahoma. I could give it to you from Choctaw or Cherokee wisdom. Weird. There's these truths that are universal, right? That all forms of thought have. So if I can find out from my partner, like, can we talk about where do we get our truth? You know, like, how will we know what we know? So before I tell you, you know, here's what we should go do, tell me, why do you think this? You know, how do you come to this thought? Like, if you think, well, we are intimate. I asked you this morning how you're doing. You know, okay, so what makes you think that, and it's not an argument, right? It's just, it's actual, some of the phraseology we use is we're being curious. Here's the best thing. There's nothing to actually do here. If you think about it, I'll pull the curtain back on Amanda. Strictly speaking, she's not doing anything. I mean, she's making you curious about yourself and a process, and you're doing it all on your own. I mean, it's the works in you. And so the only thing you have to do is not resist it. But to not resist, it's a lot of work. I mean, that I'll give you, that's something. But it's not like you have to chant. It's not like you have to, you know, pray in a corner. It's not like you have to go read these 7 books and it's going to get in you, right? In fact, a lot of those times, how many times have you read a book and right at the first beginning of it, you start to argue with the author? You're already going, wow, I don't know if that's true, or I don't like that. I don't like the way you said that, or who is looking at the picture of them, because I'm going to judge that. How old are they? Right? What gender are they? Because of my training, horrible, I look for their credentials. If there's no initials, I put the book back down. You don't have any training in this, because that's the only way. So you see, my bias would be knowledge can only be gained by people with higher education. Oh, wait, that's actually not true. So if we can work with our partners in this thing to say, if our truth is that we want to be better together, you know, do you agree with that? You know, do you agree that that's important? Do you agree that that this process, what if I could tell you this process will not harm? Like, this isn't going to hurt. And it's about being curious. Excuse me, it's about being self-observant, right? I'm not going to ask you to do anything. I'm going to ask you to observe yourself. But again, what do we base that in? If we base it in our truth, and if I say, well, for these teachers, for example, if I said, where do you get your truth? Because I could spend the next 4 hours reciting neuroscience to you, but if that's not where you derive your truth, it'll kind of bounce off. And so for them, really what they wanted to say in a sense was, we get our truth from ourselves, from this group, because we've all been here. You know, the least of us has been here 20 years as a teacher. And that lady over here has been here 38 years. And so I can already see, so me coming in and telling you anything isn't going to go. And what you guys really want is, one of the factors of an effective organization is that you've allowed your employees autonomy. And you guys don't feel like you have autonomy. Yeah, so how do we get you some autonomy? Now, all of a sudden, now that book, by the way, I'm glad I stripped everything out of it, because that was my truth in that book, and that would have nothing to do with these other people, and they wouldn't have ran with it. And so your truth doesn't work on your partner. That's your truth. But your partner has a truth in there too, and the only way they can find it is to go through this process. So what you're really saying, and you guys may even say it too, but in psychotherapy, we say you got to trust the process. Right? And the process looks weird sometimes because we're kind of poking around trying to figure out where's the soft spot, right? Where's the spot that we can get in? And so that's, you know, a really, I hope a wonderful way of being able to set our partners to ease is like, I will not ask a change to happen. Because in fact, you probably didn't go into this process thinking, I've got 3 things I need to change. Amanda, help me with this, and, you know, I didn't even know these things were problems, or I didn't even know I had this until I did this. And so the wonderful thing is, like, we're not asking anyone to do anything. Now, it so happens that just by doing this process, you begin to change. We say organisms under observation change their behavior. Well, you know, if it's called the Hawthorne Effect. In this case right here, if you and your intimate partner or and it's really important, you know, again, intimate isn't sex, it's about closeness. It's about, you know, that 11 p.m. talk and opening up. It's like, who's that? That's intimacy. It can include sex, but it doesn't have to. But you're talking about really instinctual drives here. And maybe at some point we can talk about those, but the instinctual drives, really my wife would be the one that'd be amazing at that. But you're really talking about, so let me just say quickly, self-preservation, okay, sexual and social. So self-pres are a person who has strong self-pres instinct, is a person who at first is thinking about the temperature of the room. Maybe think about being in one of these groups, Amanda, and about the person that walks in and is looking for the comfy chair. I remember reading chapters of those books that said, you know, we got there and I'm looking for the chair. You know, I'm looking like, when's lunch? You know, and are there snacks, right? Those people that have that first or forward, I have strong self-preservation instincts. And as you know, instincts are ancient, right? These aren't thoughtful things. It's just kind of, it's who I think I am, but it's really who I am when I'm being automatic, when I'm not thinking. Because think of your partner, if they're self-pres forward, they're not self-pres. If it's a man, let's say in where we are, I don't know where are you guys at?
Florida and Colorado.
Florida and
Miami,
Colorado. Okay,
Montana.
so, well, probably all of you then, you probably know guys that go hunting or fishing, right? So where did that same self-pres energy that when we were talking about going out to dinner tonight with friends, and they were very particular about where that was going to be and what was going to be served, where did that go when they were up at dark 30 going out to frigid waters to wait? Well, they didn't have any self-pres there. That got thrown, but over here they're full of it, right? Well, there you can tell the difference of automatic processing. You know, that when I'm doing something I prefer, I don't have, it's not a problem. But when I'm skeptical of this thing, then it gets bigger, right? Social instinct are the people at the party, or the people in the room who, I know Amanda, so I'm going to try to come up to it and talk to Amanda, and I'm not going to talk to anyone else because no one else is important. Amanda's important, and so I'm going to make sure she's forward. But I'm also very concerned about how everyone else feels in the room. So I don't want to tell you guys that I'm super wealthy because I don't want to make you feel bad, right? So that's a social pres. That's this thing coming out that's like I'm aware of the social group. And then sexual instinct, it's kind of poorly named because it's not about sex per se, but it's about an odd term that we use here, but it's about being penetrated and penetrating. It's about getting into somebody, about getting deep. It sometimes is sort of mistakenly referred to as one-to-one, but it's not really one, it's more than that. It's deeper than that. It can include sex, but it really, like for instance, if you're doing art, or maybe when you're writing and you're really flowing, that's sexual instinct. That's a drive, that's an instinctual drive that is about like focus and being really connected. Well, all these areas are the areas that are impacted in our relationships. And so to get into those, though, instinctual stuff, imagine how deep down in your brain is an instinct. Well, we got to get through some stuff to get into those. And so when you hear them say stuff like, well, I'll do this work with you just so long, you know, as long as it makes us not argue as much. Well, that sounds self-pressy, you know, that they're trying to self-preserve, or, oh God, do we have to talk about this again? That's a sexual instinct in a blind spot, meaning that they're unaware of how that just came across. I just had a dad yesterday, I was working with mom and dad, husband and wife, and the dad, thinking he was saying the right thing to the wife, said, she said, well, why don't you go back down to the party? I'll stay up here alone. And he went, oh, I'm not falling for that. Now he thought he was being really good by saying, I'm not falling for that. But of course, what is he saying to his wife? You know, I'm not falling for that. Oh, you're setting me up. I'm going to get in trouble if I walk out the door. So I'm going to stay here. Well, you're not helping. Like, yes, I am, because I'm not. I know what you know, right? When they're trying to like second guess, that's all this. So that's the long, short answer is, you know, where do you get your truth? And the answer is probably in instincts and trying to help our partners see that we're not trying to change them, but you will be changed by this process. Even sometimes that can sound aggressive. Well, it's not intended to be aggressive, right? It's just said, like, kind of trust the process. And you'll see that as you begin to do more of this and you get out of your automatic habits, what happens is growth happens. And that's what you've experienced. That's what you're trying to share. So trying to share like the effect of this does sound kind of culty, Amanda, I'll give you, but it's not, right? It's just going, I want you to also be free, right? I want you to also have this.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Great
City.
insight.
Well, City, you have any last questions? Reflections?
I don't have a question, but I have just thoroughly enjoyed this. And that's kind of why Lori and I are still around. I was at Amanda's first retreat, and I had been helping people for a lot of years. And what I experienced there removed the shame that sometimes happens when you're with couples, when you're working. It just, I got so fascinated with it that I just stuck around. She couldn't get rid of me because I was just like, I am not leaving. I'm doing more of this. And I kept telling her, this is more than about books. This is more than, you know, and we're finally getting to that place where we're more than about books. I was just getting ready to tell her this morning before you came on. I was saying, you know, for a long time I've called you my book coach, but that was only true until March of 2012. My book ended. That was it. She's more been a spiritual coach and a therapist. Like this healing, my healing process through joining up all her writing retreats, and it's healed my life. And I think it's I just am sold on it. It's amazing. The answers are in each of us, and she just witnesses the process, and it's so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you. I've really been fascinated by I could just sit and listen for hours, but I know our time is up. In fact, I have to go on to the next thing here, but yes, I appreciate Lonny. It's just been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lonny. I do. I know we could just like talk for hours, and I think maybe it would be fun to get your wife to join us at some point and
Next retreat.
share a little bit more. The next retreat, listen to her. She's like, oh, yeah, we should make
Planning.
time. Okay. Yes, I see. I see. That's good. These are team members now, so they can just make these things happen, right?
Yeah.
So
Excellent.
thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of my You Can't Make This Story Up journey, because this is something that I have witnessed for years. And the more that I've worked with clients who have backgrounds in science and who understand interpersonal neurobiology and how the brain works, and like I've learned just enough to understand why the things are happening the way they are, and to refine just a little bit more. But the main thing is like staying out of the way and really learning to trust the people, that they have the answers and they know what to do. They just need to be witnessed in the process, believed in that they can.
I think it's wonderful, the sense of responsibility to share it, you know, when you see things that people experience as helpful is, again, a trait that we really have to encourage, because always whispering in us is going to be, oh, come on, you know, don't you, oh, you know, what we need is the encouragement to say, if you found something that anybody found helpful, you know, we used to have this idea that, you know, if you're not helpful on this earth, then get off it, you know, is how do I share that? You know, what I found to be effective for some people. And then after you have more than some, and you have a couple, then you have a dozen, then you have two, then you start to realize, weirdly, you get more and more responsible. I can say as a therapist, it's really hard for me to be shifting my practice away from clinical and more into forensic. At the same time, sort of necessary. I've done enough of that. I want something kind of different. But the sense of responsibility, if someone calls up and says, hey, I need to get my kid in to see you, to go, okay. It's hard to say no, right? And so you're having that sense as you develop this, you know, like, hey, I'm kind of responsible now. Like, it's like I found this treasure, and this treasure helps everybody I show it to. dang, I have to show it to more people. How do I show it to more? And how do I help them? Because weirdly, as I show them this, now they have one.
Mhm.
Weird. This is the genie in the bottle, except every time I show somebody the genie in a bottle, they get a genie in a bottle. And so now they have to go show the genie in the bottle. And so how do you keep that going? And I think it's a simple answer, you know, and yet a lot of work. We say the theory is easy, the application's hard, right? And so this is, you know, it's sort of easy to think that, but it is difficult on everyone to keep it going. But it's wonderful you guys are even doing this, that you guys keep this started, because it'll at least starts to be some placeholders. Regardless of how you use it right now, it eventually becomes something else, and you know how to use it, and you're glad that you did this now.
Mhm.
So I think it's just, I'm impressed by all of you doing this. This is neat.
Mm.
This is neat work. And as you can tell, it's been thrilling to my puppy too. He's kind of down there. You can't really see him, but he's laying on his back being
He's
cute.
all nice and
Yeah,
relaxed.
he's definitely in the Zen state right now.
Oh, good. Well, I just want to thank you for being here, for sharing your expertise, and for being part of the journey. You know, I mean, really, who knows what will happen next?
It's wonderful.
And,
You
yeah.
guys get to it and keep going, because you're doing well. This will be fun to see where it goes.
Lonny, after all of everything that you shared today, I'm sure there will be some people who want to find out more about what you do, and maybe connect with you in some way. How can they do that?
The easiest way would be to email me at Lonny, LONNY, at neurobx.com, NEUROB as in boy, X as in X-ray.com.
And thank you to all of our listeners and viewers for being with us on this episode of Sips of Story and Sanity. If you like what you heard, please consider subscribing, leaving us a review, and maybe even sharing your own "you can't make this story up" moment, like something that Lonny shared today that just made you go, oh, that part makes sense. You can find more details about our upcoming collaborative book, You Can't Make This Story Up, What If It's All Happening For Us, at truetointention.com. So that's it for today. Thanks.
Thank you.